Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Congenial, convivial, and amiable as always. Again, I want to be clear on this possible showdown between Governor Perry, the state of Texas, and the BLM. I'm not advocating for violence. I don't want violence. God forbid that should ever happen. Nobody wants that. We do not want this resolved through the force of arms. But Governor Perry has said, look, we're going to defend the rights of our private property owners in Texas. And if they come with arms, the only way you can protect the right of private property owners is with lethal force. And that's the reason you've got a National Guard. So it's not a matter of vigilante justice. It's not a matter of people taking matters into their own hands. You've got an elected representative of the people, the governor of the state, who has legal constitutional authority over his own state militia, the well-regulated militia of the National Guard, and he can deploy them to protect the security of his state. I mean, that's right there in the Constitution. So it sounds to me like Governor Perry is saying that he's prepared to do that if push comes to shove. Now, here's Ted Cruz, clip number 5. Ted Cruz talking again about this overreach from the federal government. Let's listen.
We should have a federal government protecting the liberty of the citizens, not using the jackboot of authoritarianism to come against the citizens. And I think this is the unfortunate and tragic culmination of the path that President Obama has set the federal government upon.
So Cruz talking about the BLM coming against Cliven Bundy, referring to it as the jackboot of authoritarianism. And jackboot, you think of the Nazis when that term is used. Now, here's Judge Napolitano, clip number 6. He's talking also about the showdown with the BLM in Nevada. Let's listen.
Because the government, instead of using the least force necessary, which is what the rule of law is using the most force possible because they want to intimidate the Bundys. I'm convinced he cannot be intimidated. They want to intimidate others, and they're probably a little unsure of themselves, Sean, and so they're compensating for that lack of surety, of certainty, with this massive Stalinistic-like use of force.
You know, in the Napolitano one, they say, look, the Constitution does not authorize the federal government to own any of this land. I want to repeat that. This is Judge Napolitano, talking about the land in Nevada. The Constitution does not authorize the federal government to own any of this land. All of it is being held unconstitutionally, and all of it should be returned to the private property owners from which it was taken or to the states whose borders it exists, period. That's Judge Napolitano. Now, a couple of more sound bites from Rick Perry, and then we'll go to your phones, go to the phone calls, 888-589-8840. This is clip number 2, Governor Perry talking about what the founders envisioned was that the states would be a laboratory of democracy. The reason they were given so much sovereignty, the reason they were given so much latitude, so much liberty, the reason that the federal government was so restricted, so narrow in its scope of action, was so that each state could formulate the public policy that it thought was in the best interest of its citizens, and then the other residents in the other states in America could learn from their example or even migrate if they wanted. Here's what he had to say.
I don't make any apologies that I am a competitive governor and I come into California or Illinois or for any other state. Just as Bobby Jindal and Rick Scott come into Texas and say, hey, we'd like for you to take a look at Louisiana or take a look at Florida. Those are two really competitive governors out there, and there's a host of others that are very competitive. I mean, what Mary Fallon does, Susana Martinez, Nikki Haley, I mean, those are governors that get it about tax, regulatory, legal policies, and having skilled workforce in place and making your state be competitive. I happen to think that our founding fathers knew what they were talking about when they discussed that 10th Amendment and said, you know, the federal government's supposed to do a few things, do it very well, enumerate those powers, and then you states work out all these other things, which says to me, let's compete against each other. Who's got the best tax policy? Who's got the best regulatory climate? Who has the best legal system for the people of your state? And then people will move and go to where they want to go. And if that's the test, more people have migrated out of New York and California over the last decade than any two states to go to places where they can find some relief.
So laboratory democracy. People can move, and people have left California, they left New York. The taxes are too high. Cost of living is too high. They want to go someplace where the taxes are lower and there's more regulatory relief. Here is clip number 3, talking about environmentalism, talking about fracking, how it's encouraged, it's permitted, it's endorsed in the state of Texas, but they're clamping down on it in New York. And so Stuart Varney asked Governor Perry about fracking in New York. He went to New York to debate Governor Cuomo. Let's have a debate about taxes and regulatory policy. Governor Cuomo didn't want to get within a mile of him, and I'll tell you why. Liberals do not want to debate, and one of the reasons why liberals want a top-down federal government-imposed policy of regulation is they know that if they allow states to compete, that the bankruptcy of socialism is going to be exposed for all to see. You know why the Globetrotters never played an NBA team? They did not want their weaknesses exposed, and they knew that competition would do that. So they beat up on the Washington Generals day in and day out because they knew that genuine competition would expose their flaws, expose their weaknesses. Liberals are the same way. They know that their ideas don't work. They don't want the American people to know that, so they don't want competition between the states. And here's what Governor Perry had to say about fracking.
Here's what I can share with them, that it is a safe practice, that all of the science shows that it is a safe practice. And if you care about your citizens, the southern part of New York, I mean, it's almost Appalachian in places. I mean, the poverty that's there and the jobs that could be created are a fascinating amount of jobs. There are young Hispanics in South Texas who maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Stuart, didn't have a job or maybe had a minimum wage job. Today, making $100,000 driving a truck in that Eagle Ford formation because the state of Texas has decided to produce the resources that God's put under the land in Texas, and we've created extraordinary amount of wealth, not just for the oil companies and not just for the state.
So that's Governor Perry, not just good for the oil companies, not just good for the state, good for the people looking for jobs. So the point I want to make here, who are the compassionate ones? Who are the compassionate ones? Is it the people whose policies want to provide opportunity for people, provide jobs for people, provide access to natural resources and encourage their harvesting and their extraction and their refinement for human use? It's conservatives who want to do these things. And that's where the compassion is found, because that's where jobs, that's where opportunity comes from. So the liberals are the ones that are lacking in compassion because their policies keep people, keep an economy in neutral and keep people from having jobs they otherwise could have. Last clip, this is on the immigration issues. Asked to respond to Jeb Bush's comment the other day that illegal immigration is an act of love. It's not a felony. I understand why they do it, and therefore I support it. And here's Governor Perry, and this, frankly, is where I think Governor Perry's Achilles heel is when it comes to his possible candidacy for the presidency. I think you listen to this soundbite, he's almost in as big a trouble now as he was in 2012 on the immigration issue. Let's listen to his reaction to Jeb Bush's comments, breaking our immigration laws, an act of love.
I totally understand about people breaking a law to take care of their family, particularly when the country whose law you're breaking has for 40 years basically said, come on over, don't worry about it. And we did that. And we have to stand up and truthfully say that that was the message all too often through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the 90s. That's the message that we sent to individuals in Mexico. Come on over here. We need your work. And then in the 2000s, it was like, wait a minute. We've got drug cartels. We've got people who want to do terrible things to America in the form of terrorists. And now we're going to ship everybody back to where they're from.
Well, nobody's talking about that. That's a straw man. Ship everybody back where they can. We're not talking about that. Nobody's talking about that, Governor Perry. And I'm kind of offended at people that keep using that analogy. We want to round everybody up and ship them home. Nobody's talking about that. What we are talking about is just applying and enforcing immigration law. Secure the border, build a double-layer security fence across the entire southern border, lock it up, seal it up, and then let's use E-Verify. No, you don't get a job, you don't get benefits, you don't get an education unless through E-Verify it's verified that you have the legal right to be in the country. What happens if people can't pass the E-Verify evaluation? They go home. No, we don't have to get buses out and load them up. They will self-repatriate. It happened in Alabama. They just go home. They take themselves home. All you got to do, secure the border, use E-Verify. That's it. And the illegal immigration problem will take care of itself. All right, let's go to the phones. Let's begin with Frederick in Dallas, Texas. Frederick, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. You live in Dallas, Texas. So what are your comments about Governor Perry?
Well, Brian, I've lived in Dallas, Texas for 32 years. That's half my life. Governor Perry has never done a single thing to defend our border with Mexico. what makes you think he'll do anything to defend our border with Oklahoma?
Well, and that's a good observation, Frederick, because I just said that's where I think his Achilles heel is on the immigration issue. And it sounds like maybe you agree.
I think millions of Texans would agree with me.
Well, and I was hoping, frankly, that after his debacle in 2012, where he said, look, if you don't support illegal immigration, you don't have a heart. I mean, he stuck a knife in his own campaign when he said that. And, you kind of hope that he would have learned something about the immigration issue and where the base is at. I mean, it's, Frederick, where you're at. It's where I'm at. All we're asking for is for the enforcement of the laws that are on the books. That's all we want. A secure border. Let's use E-Verify, make sure anybody works here, gets benefits here, goes to school here, has the legal right to be in the country. And, it sounds to me like maybe Governor Perry just has not gotten the picture yet on the issue of immigration. And, by saying he completely understands, well, we talked about this last week, Frederick, but I mean, Jeb Bush said it's okay because it's an act of love. It's not that serious. Not a felony. Why are we getting worked up over this? Not a big deal. It's an act of love. So, basically what Jeb Bush is saying, it sounds like Governor Perry's almost agreeing with him. Hey, it's okay for you to break the law as long as you were doing it for your family. As long as it's an act of love, you can break the law. That's essentially what he's saying. If you rob a convenience store, as long as it's for your family, then we'll consider it an act of love and we'll cut you a break. You traffic drugs because you want to provide for your family. As long as it's an act of love, we'll cut you a break. I mean, you start thinking about that philosophy and it just gets absurd. All right, Frederick, listen, I appreciate the call. I think what Frederick is talking about, he lives in Texas, watched Governor Perry for a long time, been there for 32 years. And according to Frederick, Governor Perry hasn't lifted a finger to secure the southern border with Mexico. So we'll see if any others have an observation about that. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. We'll devote the next segment to your calls. So line them up and we'll process as many as we possibly can. You're listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk. We'll be right back.